All right, so this is the third and final part of the Access with SQL Server Academy. We started down this path because I've recognized that every year more and more people are going to be using both technologies and are new to this technology. And I was seeing on the forums online people asking questions, well, what other DBC drivers should I use, and what is the best practice, right? And I got a lot of great information on my blog, but I felt that being the existence of this group is Access with SQL Server, I thought that we would start off our season, which starts in September, with a three-part academy. So we're going to repeat this again next year, next September. We'll start with the academy version 1, part 2, excuse me. Part 1, part 2, and part 3, September, October, November of next year. And then throughout the year, we're going to have some great Access with SQL Server topics. Unfortunately, I'm under the weather and not feeling all that good, but I asked Susan Pine, who is a senior Access developer at my firm, to help out tonight. Welcome, Susan.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Pleasure to
Susan has a lot of experience with SQL Server and Access. She has grown. She's had a meteoric path through our company and grown tremendously in the last 2 years. In terms of her knowledge, I haven't seen anybody take on this kind of technology and learn it so quickly, so fast. And so I'm really happy to have her on board at IT Impact. She helps companies throughout the U.S., sometimes helping multiple companies in one day. Isn't that right, Susan?
You're not kidding. My hair's going to be falling out soon.
From manufacturing to service industries, she's seen a lot of different projects and a wide range of projects. And she has started writing blog posts for our AccessExperts.com website. And I'm hoping that one day her work will be recognized by Microsoft. For now, she's also the Access User Group Coordinator, so you'll see emails from her announcing meetings not just for this chapter, but for all the other chapters. All right, so before we get started, I'd like to do a quick survey here. How many of you are currently using Access with SQL Server? Can you just let me know in the comments there? How many of you currently are Access with SQL Server?
We are about to.
Yeah, if you currently, that'd be great if you can tell me you're currently on there.
We're in the process of working with a client to upgrade them to SQL Server.
Oh, great.
They're a energy company, pretty much foundation repair, stuff like that.
One quick way to learn is to get your feet wet with a project, right? So that's how I did it. I would give them a great rate at first. Because I was learning, I want to make sure I did right by them. And now, of course, if you were to hire me, you wouldn't get that same rate. All right. So tonight is our last topic, and it's the most difficult topic to discuss. You know, when you're dealing with SQL Server, you're dealing with SQL Server Management Studio, which from now on we'll call SSMS. And you're dealing with the TSQL language, right? Transact-SQL language, which is a subset of the SQL ANSI standard, right? Because there is a standard, international standard for SQL, SQL, structured query language. And each vendor has their own version, right? Oracle has their own version. Microsoft has their own version. And so they extend the language, right? So with SQL Server, you can do SQL Server specific things with it. So what's important here to know is we're going to be diving in with a couple of things. Number one, we're going to be talking a lot about CTE, which is called Common Table Expressions. And number two, I like to end the evening with some questions and answers you may have. And so And so I'd like to hand this over to Susan before I lose the rest of my voice. Susan, take it away, please.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Just let me get organized here and I will share my screen with you.
Good evening again.
Okay.
Good evening.
Hello,
So,
from
hello.
Germany. Good evening,
Yes.
Dan. All
Gosh,
right.
we've got people from all over. Okay, let me see. I'll share this screen. Here we go. Just let me know when you can see my desktop.
Here we go.
Okay, great. So, yeah, CTEs, as Juan has already told you, they are common table expressions. Now, let me just give you, go through the agenda.
I'm in a webinar, Sister Elaine. I can't talk.
Okay, so our agenda.
Tone is missing.
Just lost you. Lost the voice.
Can you guys hear me?
Okay, can you
Yeah.
hear me now?
Okay.
Yep.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah, great. Okay, so our agenda for this evening, I will give you an introduction on CTEs and how they can be used. We'll go over a simple CTE just so I can give you the foundations and how you create them. Then we'll look at using a CTE instead of a derived table. We'll then go on to look at some multiple CTEs in a query and recursive CTEs. Okay, so what is a CTE? A CTE is like a memory table, just like your virtual tables where you use derived tables or subqueries. There are views. There are also temporary tables and table variables, and your common table expressions. There's no particular preference over what you should use, but I think every developer gets comfortable with using a certain format. And of course, there are some benefits of using one item over the other. Let's see. Now, CTEs have been available since SQL Server 2005. So you can use them in all versions since then. And it's just a technique to create a temporary set of data, set of records that can be used multiple times in its current context. Okay, so let me start with let's just go over this. Okay, now why use common table expressions? It simplifies your query, makes it easier to test, which I'll show you as we're going through the examples. You can use it with recursion, which means the query can call itself. So you can use a CTE and within that call the CTE again, which is something you can't do with derived tables. You have to repeat the select statement for a derived table. Which there goes on to my next item. It helps make derived table queries easier to read. So if you're doing, say for example, select blah, 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 blah from, and then you're doing a derived table, which is another select statement for your from, and if you're using that multiple times in one query, then it means if you make an alteration to it, you have to alter it in every single part where you've got that derived table. Where if you're using a CTE, it's just one select statement that you have to modify. And again, as I said, it's an alternative to a temporary table. Okay, so let's go on to some examples. Juan, feel free to step in if there's anything you want to add.
Well, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
So one of the things about developers, ex-developers, is we love to use derived queries and have a strings of queries, right? Where in my case, I'll create a query that calculates, for example, inventory totals by product. And then I'll use that in a subsequent query for a report, right? So I can include the product name. And so I may have multiple queries in succession. The only one I have to execute is the last one in the chain. And when I open the last one in the chain, Access will calculate all the other ones prior to that. And so as Access developers, one of the first mistakes I would make was to create multiple views in SQL Server. Same analogy, right? I create a view to calculate totals by product, and then another view to include the product name and so forth. But with this CTE, with the CTEs, you don't have to do that. It's faster to work with CTEs, multiple CTEs, and have multiple views. And it's a lot easier to compile, have a project plan, have SQL Server have an optimization plan for it, than to have this multiple views in the system. So that's my 2 cents on CTE.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, another thing that I'd like to add, that if you're using, as I go on and I'll show you a query with multiple CTEs, I think it's easier to maintain it in that when you open it, you see all the select statements there, every part of your query, where all the data's coming from. Whereas if you've got a query that's then using data from another view or from 2 or 3 views, it means you have to open them all up to see what everything is, where everything is pulling from and what you need to edit, rather than it all just being in one simple query here. So this is just a straightforward CTE, and they always begin with a with. So we start with, and then you put your name of your CTE that you're going to use. Now here in this example, I'm defining the column names of the CTE query, which I've seen in many examples, but I don't actually do that when I'm doing a CTE. I'll just do it with CTE sales and then just go on to the as, and then I will define my column names in my actual select statement if I need to. Okay, so once you've done your with, name your CTE as, you then start with opening your brackets, and you'll find then your select statement is held within the brackets, just to define that is. So if I can actually just select that now and execute that, and that is running, giving my data, showing me the data that I've selected here in this CTE. That is one good thing about when you're wanting to test your queries, is that you can, as long as your CTEs are not using another CTE within the same query, you can just highlight that particular section and just execute it, just to make sure you are getting the actual data record set that you want for that section. Then once you've closed your bracket, then you have to define the outer query, where you're referencing the CTE name. So then you just put select, choose your columns that you want, and from the sales CTE. So now if I just execute all this query, and there it is, returning my record set for that. Now if you're going on to do a multiple CTE, that is when you use a comma to separate. So here is my first select statement in the CTE, and then I'm going on to define a second CTE. So I put a comma in there, and then just the name of the CTE as, and again my select statement within brackets. As I showed you before, I can select this section and just execute that and see my record set that it returns. just to verify that my data is correct, that it's giving me the information that I want. And then here in my final select statement, I'm calling records from the CTE sales and also doing a join with CTE sales quota, joining on the salesperson ID and the year. So if I run that now, there we go. And it's just returning all the information. So I'm getting my salesperson ID, the sales year, the total sales, and the quota for that salesperson for that year. Now I've done projects for clients where they have multiple tables, so they may have a table where it's got their orders in, another table that's got the budget for the project, another table that's got estimates for the project, another table that's got any payments or other parts to do with the job. And they wanted to get some kind of a balance to see where exactly they are on the project, how much of the budget do they have, how much has been used, what's left. So I have built for them a multiple CTEs where I'm pulling first of all each bit of information from each individual table for the relevant customer, or if it's say for example they have a set of projects, they just want this information returned for one project. They will pass the project ID through as a parameter, and then just using the ID, the CTEs will pull information from all the different tables just for that one project, and the final select statement brings all the data together for that one project.
So I'm just going to step in here real quick, but basically when you can't use a join, right? Because obviously the best way to do is to have a join, inner join, outer join with a query. But if you can't have a join for whatever reason, you need to do a query before your main query, then you would use a CTE. So it's the same concept when you have you create multiple queries in Access, and then you use the query number 1 and query number 2 and the query number and the third query number 3, right? So think of that when you design your CTEs. Notice that you start with a semicolon and the word with at the beginning, and then there's a comma after the first CTE. Can you highlight that comma for me, Susan? Yeah. So you're going to have multiple CTEs. You got to use a comma between them. And then just before, when you're done with the CTE, there is no comma before your main select statement. Go ahead, continue.
Okay, so this next sample I'm showing you is where we had actually calling on the CTE several times within this project. I think it was this one. Okay, so so here, this is my first CTE, which is CTE parts. I'm first of all doing a select. This is to get a hierarchy of product assemblies, and I'm selecting all the items where the product assembly is 800. Okay, then I'm going to do a union all, and this time I'm on to the next level, and I'm doing an inner join on the same CTE, on this actual CTE that I'm just creating. I'm doing an inner join with that, which is something you can't do with derived tables. So if I run this now, okay, let me run this first part first. This is running the first section. Okay, so here I've got all the product assemblies. The component level is 0. Okay, so now we're going to run this again, and we have a link here on the product assembly ID, and the component ID. So this is sort of like where you've got a parent part and a child part, and so we're wanting to link, oh, okay, this child part, where's its parent part? And so if I highlight this now, okay, why did it not work? Oh, because I need to do it all at once, sorry. Okay, so let's just execute here. So now what it's actually done is it's run through and pulling through all the components and building on that and showing you what level the component level is.
So not only can you use a CTE within itself, but you can also use a CTE with another CTE, right? So if you had CTE parts, in this case, she may have another one called CTE inventory. She can call CTE parts and that other subsequent CTE. So there is a recognition between CTEs. And the reason she couldn't just run the select union all is because I didn't know what CTE parts is. She would have to. So one thing you would do, let's say for example we're troubleshooting, right, the CTE parts. Can you press enter after that CTE and do another select instead of select product? Put insert a line, if you will, after that closing parenthesis.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just say there's a select star from CTE parts. Select star from CTE parts. And then you can run your CTE there. And notice the Intellisense is smart enough to recognize CTE parts as she's doing it.
Okay, I'll just select this.
And now that she's got the select star from CTE parts, now she can execute just that portion of the query to troubleshoot it. Remember, when you're working on queries, my number one adage: know the answer before you run the question. Ask the question, right? You gotta make sure your queries are right. So you gotta verify that they make sense, what the query results are right before you move on and use that in a more complex query. All right.
Okay.
Go ahead, keep going.
And the final CTE that I want to show you is using a CTE in an update statement. So here what I'm doing first is I'm doing a select statement to get the information that I need to update, and then you call the update at the end like you would do with your final select statement. Okay, so this is again, it's the same CTE, but it's calling the CTE parts again. So if you wanted to test that, we'd just copy and paste that. So again, just to test, I'll just add that in there, highlight that section. I think it's the same query, yeah. So it's just returning that information, but then this time we're going to update a table with that information. So I just hit execute now, and there we are. There's the 14 rows of data being inserted into this table. You can also use it within I use it a lot in stored procedures and in views. You can create views with CTEs, yeah. So that was it, really. That's all I got. Let me see if I've got.
So let's talk about the implications. Let's go back. Let's go to the very first query that you created. This is a simple one, right? The select statement. Right. So you guys, the select CT here. Now, you may not be aware, but you can actually create this into a view. So what I want her to do is, Susan's going to insert a line before the with. Make sure you insert the semicolon before the word with. Insert a line before that, and create a view. Call it test view. From this query. So she's going to show you how to create the view. Now remember, you don't have to use a query builder to create a view in SQL Server. You can create a view anywhere by using the word create and then view, followed by the view name, which in this case is view test. And then the keyword as, right? So create view, the name of the view, and the keyword as. You need to put a semicolon before the with. That's always a good practice. So if you can do that for me, Susan, put a semicolon before that.
Doesn't like it.
All right, we'll leave it off then because we're probably creating the view. That's why. All right, so go ahead and leave that off, and then go ahead and execute. When she executes this, she's not executing the select statement. She's executing
just take the order
view
clause out
to create the view, right? Oh, and by the way, views don't have order bys. So we do the order by. And there it is, right? When you execute this, what did I execute? I didn't execute the CTE. I didn't execute the file statement. I executed a command to create a view. So now if she goes to press Control N, go ahead and press Control N, and select star from view test, she'll get the results of that complex query. So Control N starts a new query, and then she can do select star from view test.
we're just going to do it then now. I'll do it the other way.
She can just do it right here. All right, so George says, what's the significance of the semicolon? Well, it's just good practice, right? Microsoft always recommends a semicolon before the word with, just to make sure SQL Server understands that you're starting a new process.
Okay. Just another tip that I'd like to show you, because obviously the Intellisense doesn't know just yet that I've created this view test. So I'm just going to Edit, Intellisense, and just refresh the local cache. And that should do it. There we go. Now the line's gone.
The red squiggly line's gone. All right. Now, she created this view. Now, she goes into the Squiggle Explorer and she right-clicks on the view, select Design View. Go ahead and try that for me. I want the audience to see what happens.
Okay.
We try to editing the view test.
I'm on this one. Views.
And what happens when you try to edit the view using the view design? And your results may vary, but what I've seen in the past when I have multiple CTEs, a very complex view, it gives me an error message, right? So you can't express the CTE.
Design view.
Let's see what happens here.
I've never used Design View actually with a CTE.
Well, that's because you're doing it the right way. All right, so this worked, but sometimes it gives you an error message. So I can't represent the CTE visually here. So one way you can do this is you can go back to Object Explorer, right-click on a view, and select Create View as a new query window. So she's going to show you this. So you're going to right-click on the view and pause before you make the selection so everybody can see the menu.
Okay, so it's Script View as.
Alter. You can do Alter to. Let's do the Alter to.
Yeah, if you're wanting to do a new query and just copy off some of that, I would do Create to. But if it's the same view and you're just wanting to change something, you'd say Alter to and then New Query Editor.
And now you notice the syntax is alter view DBO view test as, and then you can make changes to your view here. And then you run this code, it'll save those changes back to the view. Now, once it's a view, now you can link it back to your Access application as a table, right? It shows up like any other table, SQL Server table, in your Access application. Remember, it's always better to have multiple CTEs than multiple views linked together for performance. Now we're going to go back to, I'm going to ask Lucy to select that with sales CTE and the entire, all the way down to this before the go. Lucy, Susan, if you can select from the with all the way down to salesperson ID semicolon. And what we're going to do is we're going to ask SQL Server to analyze this query to see if there are any optimizations that could be used. Don't include the go. The way you do that is you press Control L, right? Control L is in Larry. And SQL Server analyzes the query and tells you if there are any missing indexes. It may recommend some missing indexes. But it shows you the performance plan. Now, notice here, this is a great example. There's a missing index. Why don't you take it from here, Susan?
Okay, so once you see this, this is telling you that you need to add an index and it can optimize the functionality of your view. So what I'm going to do when I right click, I'm going to ask for the missing index details. Okay, so this gives me a bit more information. And what it wants me to do is create a non-clustered index on sales order header for the salesperson order ID and include by order date. So what that will do is it will order the data by the salesperson ID and order date. So what I would do here then is just create a name for my index. So I usually do IX at the beginning, so I know it's an index, and I would use the name of the table, sales order header, and I would just do an underscore and use the field that is focusing on for the index, which is the salesperson ID. Okay. At that point, because you've got these forward slash and the asterisk, they are what is commenting out this set of text. So what I would actually do at this point, I just highlight the text to create the index and just click on the execute. And there it's gone away and it's created that index for me. So if I come over here now and go into the view test, open that drop down, and we see here there's the indexes. Just click on that plus arrow. And maybe it's not refreshed yet. Let me refresh that. Go back again. Indexes. And why is it not showing?
I think it's
oh, it's on the
indexing
table. It's on the table, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Sales order header.
I'm still learning some bits.
You're doing great.
Okay, sales order header, indexes, and where's the one I did? This one. There it is.
All right, so let's do a pop quiz. What would happen if Susan were to execute the create index query, index code again? What would happen? Can anybody in the audience tell me in the comments here what would happen if she were to execute that? Create index. Go back to the create index code.
Wouldn't you get an error message saying that the index was already in place?
But why do we get an error message?
Because the index is already there.
Exactly. You cannot have, indexes are like objects, right? And so you cannot have multiple indexes with the same name. You have to drop the index and recreate it again.
Operation failed because an index or statistic with that name already exists.
Everything in SQL Server is an object, right? Tables are an object. Indexes are an object. Fields are an object. You have to start thinking in terms of everything is an object in SQL Server. Let's go back to the original CTE view and let's do Control L and see if there's another index that's needed. So you have to continue pressing Control L until all the indexes, and you notice now there's no more indexes needed. So you're good. But I've seen it where I have to do 2 or 3 times to create indexes. Now, a purist a SQL Server expert. Remember, I always say I'm never a SQL Server. I never said I'm a SQL Server expert. I'm an expert with access to SQL Server. But a SQL Server expert may chafe at the idea of me using Control L to create these missing indexes because these results, these suggestions offered by SQL Server are not foolproof. But I found that for the simple databases that I do for them that come from Access, they're just fine.
If you ever forget about the Control and L, there is also this button here, which does the same function, which will execute and show you the plan. So if I just click on that button, it gives you the same result. The other thing, Juan, I've noticed is if you're creating a database from scratch and you have very minimal data in, it won't always prompt you that you need that there's a missing index. But as you build on your database and get more and more data in, it's then when it has to work harder, and then it'll say, hang on a minute, you need to put an index in here. So I find when I'm working on projects, at the beginning you don't find the need for the missing indexes, but as the customers then are using the database, they'll come back and say, I've got this query, this view that's not running as fast as it used to do, and we'll just take a look at it and check then, and then it's usually a missing index that it needs to resolve that.
Very good. Any questions regarding CTEs before we move on to the next topic? Anybody have any question or any comments on CTEs?
Yeah, I have one, and that is if you want to set up a CTE with some runtime criteria, can you do that?
Well, that's where you link it to Access with a link, like another table, right? Access links just another SQL Server table. And then you execute the query against that link table in your Access application, right? Or you can create another view. I mean, when it comes to runtime, where clauses, that's where you use Access and the query by example, the QBE in Access to create those queries, right? Now, if you need to, sometimes that's too slow, right? Sometimes you
Exactly.
do that, that's too slow. That's when you go do a store procedure. So a store procedure, you create a store procedure, you pass the parameters to store procedure then uses the view that Susan just created or a CTE, and it modifies in real time. So if you go, can you press Control R, go down to the bottom where the...
Oh, I thought that was one that I'd used. Yeah, it's okay. I thought I had an example of a...
So great question. Yeah, I mean, if you need runtime capabilities, that's where the store procedure comes into play.
Thank you very much.
So Dan's got a quick question. What's the difference between table value functions and CTEs? Right. So table value functions are stored in the database, and they can be one advantage they have over views is that they look like a store procedure when you open them up. You know, and it's like so many things you can do with and the world of computer technology. There's never a right answer, right? So you may find that the table value function is your preference. You can go ahead and use that. I like CTEs because with CTEs, you have the ability to have it all in one process. I can highlight everything and then get suggestions for indexes to optimize the whole process. Now, anytime you create a function or a view, remember your number one benefit, and that is SQL Server is going to store the execution plan with the object. So every time you run that view, every time you run that function, it's going to have an optimized plan for you and give you the results back as fast as possible. That's number one. Number two, if your application calls this view a lot, it's going to keep it in memory. And you'll notice that the view gets faster and faster as time goes by because it recognizes that more people are calling it up. So if you can use a CTE in your Access code with ADODB, right? I mean, I could create a string in my VBA and define the exact same thing that Susan did here with the with sales CTE. Pass it on to SQL Server, and I'll get a result back. Excuse me. Almost anything you do here on SQL Server Management Studio, you can use in VBA with a string and the ADODB, right? I associate the string with an ADODB record set, and I get back all these records back with SQL Server. But the problem with that is what? When I create the CTE with my VBA, it doesn't last beyond the procedure, and it gets destroyed once the procedure executes. So it doesn't save the execution plan like a view would be, right? So if you find yourself you're going to be using something that's going to be a lot and intensively, you want to save it in SQL Server along with the execution plan so that you can get metrics over time and therefore optimize it better over time. If it's something ephemeral where you just need a quick results back from SQL Server, then use a record set near the ODB, which we use all the time. All right. Now, at the beginning of the presentation, remember Susan mentioned several things. She mentioned temporary tables, right? And table variables. So you can think about all the combinations of technology you can use SQL Server. A temporary table is stored with a temporary DB. A table variable may or may not be stored on the hard disk or may be still retained in memory. So it's up to you to define what is the best technology to use. You would use it. Now, here's when you would use a temporary table and a table variable versus CT. I'll give you a great example of that. And that is, how many times have you created a report in Access that requires you to loop through all the records in the table to additional operations, right? So you start with a query that creates a table, or you maybe create an insert query that's stored in the table that's permanent in the database. And then you go use a record set. You go through all those records to massage the data, execute some fuzzy logic because customer has requested something. I mean, it's a complex report. So in that case, you wouldn't use necessarily CT. You would use a temporary table in SQL Server, right? And then you would do a iteration to the records. Now, when would you use temporary table versus table variable? Well, that's another source of discussion. I tend to stay with table variables because, in general, but not always, they stay in memory, so they're faster. But if SQL Server runs out of memory, it will save it to a temp DB as well. All right. So the next topic, go ahead to the next slide. I think you have another topic for this presentation, right?
No, I finished. I just went back to this one. Did you give me?
No, don't you have? I just saw something there where it says commit batch transactions. You were going to show me something about batch transactions.
Oh.
Commit transaction.
Oh.
I just saw it flash on your screen.
Yeah, I didn't.
You have it open there. It looks like. This is great. Okay, let's talk about this.
Here we go.
Let's talk about this. And the best way I can explain this commit, begin transaction, commit, and begin catch is the ATM. You walk up to an ATM machine, right, with your bank card. You want to withdraw $100 or 100 pounds from your account. And there's several things going on there in the background in the bank database, right? So you got to withdraw, they got to debit your account for $100, and then they have to credit the account for money on the ATM, and all kinds of queries and transactions, right, have to happen. And if any of those queries fail, the transaction in general, the whole thing fails in the ATM because your bank doesn't want to be hanging with giving you the $100 and then not debiting your account $100, right? Because obviously then they would be out $100. So when you have a procedure like Susan has here, which is monthly forecast create, she starts with a begin, and then she's got begin try, and then you have your procedures. Then go down to the bottom of this procedure, please. And if it fails, there's a failure code, right? Begin catch. If state 0 or transaction begin, roll back transaction. Otherwise, it goes through and it commits the transaction to the database. Right. So can you highlight the commit transaction keyword so they can see that? If transaction equals 0, commit transaction. Now, I can't tell you how many times this code has saved my ass when dealing with customer databases. right? Now, usually, 99% of the time, I'm working on a beta database. So if I delete records by mistake, or if I update prices by mistake, it's no big deal. It's on the beta database. But when it's on a production database, you gotta be super careful what you're doing when you're doing an update query, right? The last thing you want to do is mess it up so that the customer ends up, then you have to go back to backups. And if you didn't do a backup, now you're really screwed because now you gotta go to the IT department, and now you got more people involved. And before you know it, it's the the head of IT is calling you saying, "What the heck has just happened? I heard that you wanted to restore the database." So a lot of times what will happen is that Susan or I will comment out the commit transaction. Go ahead and comment out the commit transaction for me, please. When you comment out the commit transaction, what happens in this procedure? For your session in SQL Server, you see the results of this procedure. If you deleted records, they show up as deleted. If you added records, they show up as new records. For everybody else in the system, in the database, they still see the records like they were, if they were not, they weren't deleted or updated. I verify that what I just did worked. Then I'll uncomment out the commit transaction, and I'll execute just the commit transactions, right? So I would highlight the words commit and transaction. And now I've committed my changes to the database. So that's just one technique that we use to make sure to see why, hey, cover our asses. So you need to start thinking about not just using batch transactions when you have multiple queries, but using batch transactions, commit and batch transactions for everything you do when it comes to update queries. When you're deleting, when you're updating, when you're inserting in a live database, right? And if it's a beta database, I'm gonna let you slide. In a live database, you really gotta be careful. So here's the procedure. You right-click on the database, you create a backup. You then do you comment out the commit transaction. You do your procedure. You verify everything that was deleted and did deleted, and then you commit the transaction. And now you are ready to go forward. So always back up, comment out the commit, verify your changes were correct, and then commit your transactions. Now there are templates of this on the web, so we're not going to do that. But just go, just it starts with it's a very popular syntax, so you should be able to find it on the web. Including a blog post by Ben. Go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, I was just going to say the other thing about having this commit transaction, that's very important. In this particular job procedure, I am making changes to two tables. I'm going in to delete information first from table monthly forecast history and also from table monthly forecast. So what I don't want is for my code to fail in the middle and delete records from one table and leave them in another table. So if it fails, it just will stop and it won't make any changes to either table. If I didn't have that commit, there is that danger that it could run through the first lot of code and delete records from one table and then leave some stranded records in the other table.
So Dan has a great question. How do you check out all affected records to test before commit? That's a great question. So if you're, in this case, she's deleting records, right? Now remember what I said, when you're developing, know the answer before you ask the question. So she knows that this procedure, for example, is going to delete 20 records. She runs the procedure through, and she tests to see how many records are left. It should be everything minus 20. Right, so I will just select count star from the table, and that count should be everything minus 20. If it didn't, then there's something wrong with the procedure. And once she's seen that, then she can click the commit transaction and then go ahead and actually do the commit. see Dan's typing some more stuff here for us.
Okay.
All right. So tonight we went over several things. Okay, there we go. So can't just view affected records in bond panel. Like, can see results. Like, say, yeah, you can't delete records, right? Which one were deleted? You have to create a table to find out which ones were deleted. All right. So tonight we went over several things, right? First of all, we talked about why the CTEs are so good and so important to developing in SQL Server. You can actually create views by simply saying create view as after you develop the CTE. And then you can actually modify CTE by right-clicking on the view and selecting Alter to in the new query window. Then we talked about batch transactions, how to commit to them. Any other questions before we finish up? We're going to finish up with what's going to happen for the rest of the year in our group. Any other questions besides Dan? I mean, Dan, you're welcome to have more questions. I'm sorry. Did you guys enjoy tonight's topic? Do you think you guys are going to be able to use CTEs going forward now? Start playing with them?
Absolutely.
Yes, but
Yeah,
I did before.
Great topic.
We're going to be posting this video. We lost Academy Part 2. I'm sorry to say because of my really bad computer setup, but we're going to be posting Academy Part 3 on the web. All right. So our next meeting will be next month in February. And it will be on, let's see here. Let me look at my calendar. February the 12th. All right. So Susan will be back next month because she's done a lot of work with encryption. I don't know about you guys, but sometimes you've walked into a customer and they have credit card numbers or social security numbers in the Access database. It makes me cringe every time I see that. And I immediately tell them, look, you got them with this data SQL Server because it's just too vulnerable in Access. But in SQL Server, you can encrypt that column, right? So we can create a social security number field in SQL Server, encrypt the column. But how do you decrypt it and serve it up to the user who's authorizing access? So next month, Susan is going to talk to you about how to encrypt columns in SQL Server and how to decrypt that data in Access so only authorized users in the enterprise can see that confidential data. So promises to be a great session next month. Please don't miss it. As always, if you liked what you heard or if you have any criticisms of what we saw today, you're always welcome to comment on Twitter at jsoto22. My LinkedIn profile. Susan also has a LinkedIn profile, so I'm sure she would appreciate the shout out. As well as our SQL Server with Access group. Let everybody know that we had a great session, and if you liked it, all your comments are always welcome. And then Dan's got January 29th. He's headlining the Access Lunchtime group. Always good to have people guest presenters. So Dan, appreciate it very much. And today we had George Hepworth, who's on Access MVP, which I'll be seeing next March at the MVP Summit in Redmond, Washington. One of my favorite times of the year, where I get to go to Redmond and see the latest and greatest in Access. And I believe that's the same day that's going to be the same week for our SQL Server Academy. So I don't think we're going to have a SQL Server Access group in March. When I come back, we'll be talking about all the things I can talk about from the summit.
Yeah, the summit is one of the things I miss most, yeah.
Well, it's just one of the great advantages of being an MVP, where they wine you and dine you.
I know that.
Look, it's always a pleasure, guys. Thank you once again to Susan. Can I have a round of applause for Susan, please? I think she did great today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. One of the most powerful
And bye-bye.
women in Access.
Thank you, Susan. Very good job.
One question. Which date in February was it?
The 12th,
February,
I
I
believe.
believe, the 12th of February, yes.
12th. Okay. Thank you.
Don't miss
Bye-bye.
it. It promises to be pretty compelling stuff.
Thank you, Susan and Juan, both of you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
All right, this has been Juan Soto and Susan Pine from Access with SQL Server Group, live from Chicago, saying so long, everyone. Have a great evening, and we'll see you next month.
Goodbye.